Hello, welcome to the conversation here on News Central Television. This is the program where we bring you up to speed with all the political happenings on the continent. I am Gbenga Aborowa.
And I'm Rita Omodia. On the conversation today, we will be telling you the kind of successor Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari wishes for, inform the APC governors and committee about his choice of a candidate before he traveled to Spain. The question is this type of candidate, is he a northerner, southerner, or someone from the west? Well, time will tell.
Also today on the conversation, we will be dissecting the deal signed by Rwanda to accept asylum seekers from the United Kingdom. Yeah, so, and quite a lot to talk about.
Quite a lot.
Today.
I mean, Rwanda has gotten an initial settlement of about $156 million just for this asylum seekers. And it's quite questionable. You know, earlier on while we're discussing it, we said there have been a lot of atrocities committed in Rwanda. And right now we're seeing asylum seekers being moved from the UK to Rwanda.
And just a few years ago, Rwanda did open fire on protesting refugees in their country. So why would you send asylum seekers to that kind of place? But we have the experts on board to help us analyze this deal and look at the merits and demerits.
Definitely, and that will be our first discussion for today. So we start with Britain announcing a deal with Rwanda on Thursday to send some asylum seekers thousands of miles to the East African country. A plan, it said, will stop people smugglers sending desperate migrants on treacherous journeys across the English Channel. The plan will see some people who arrive in Britain as stowaways on trucks or in small boats picked up by the UK government and to Rwanda, apparently for good.
Now, the Rwandan government has said the agreement would initially last for 5 years, and Britain had paid £120 million upfront for housing and integrating the migrants. UK opposition politicians and refugee groups condemned the move as inhumane, unworkable, and a waste of public money. And the United Nations said it raised a number of human rights concerns. But Rwandan Foreign Affairs Minister Vincent Biruta said the agreement is about ensuring that people are protected, respected, and empowered to further their own ambitions and settle permanently in Rwanda if they choose. Now, joining us live from Brussels in Belgium to analyze this is Nweke, a global affairs analyst. Good evening to you, Collins, and thanks for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you, Gbenga. Thank you, Rita, for having me.
Thank you.
Now, callers, opposition politicians have described the plan by United Kingdom Home Secretary Priti Patel to send asylum seekers to Rwanda as evil and inhumane amidst fierce criticism from refugee charities saying the move is ill-conceived. How do you react to this?
I will take it a step further and actually call this a model of the Geneva Convention that grants asylum seekers the right to be heard fully in a neutral country, in a country of their choice. And I also want to say that insufficient signals have been sent out by human rights organizations and so on and so forth. Now, I do not know, at least it is not on record so far, of any democratic nation in the world that has actually condemned this, in no uncertain words. But let us pause to also look at what had preceded this scheme by the UK. We should remember that even the European Union has similar practices in place. Take, for example, the EU had taken steps to ensure that migrants arriving from, Libya are actually held in Libya and then interrogated and their asylum applications filed and held there. For Christ's sake, we're talking of a country that is ungovernable. At least there is no government of, national unity as at the time that, that scheme was done by the European Union. Now, all of this put together, it simply tells you that, rather than working on a sustainable, solution to issue of migration, issue of, global crisis, that they are actually looking at ways and means of stopping people from actually migrating, and worse still, stopping legitimate refugees from taking their rights as granted by the Geneva Convention to seek refuge in a third neutral country. So yes, this is despicable, and one can only hope that sooner rather than later, the UK will realize that what they have done here, this particular scheme, actually sends very worrying echoes of their imperialist past, where slaves were being traded from across Africa, shipped to their country, for labor and all of that. So this sense, it resonates, it brings back memories of such practices that they should be taking steps to act in ways that do not remind the world of it, but they are doing the exact opposite.
All right, Collins, now about a month ago is when we heard of this news, and possibly from the news we're hearing today, June 14, we might have the first batch. Now, you clearly highlighted some of the reasons Boris Johnson, that's the Prime Minister, says he wants to do with this asylum deal. Now, he says a threat of a one-way ticket to Rwanda will save countless lives by deterring migrants from trying to cross the channel in dinghies. Now, do you agree with him that it will reduce exploitation by making the UK no longer a viable option to smuggle vulnerable people? Let's not forget that a lot of people have also died while trying to move through these dinghies to the UK.
That is just any excuse at all that Boris Johnson could find to be able to justify this despicable scheme. Now, we have seen over the years as the UK, the EU, and other countries of the world tighten their borders, build very, very large and long walls, we have seen that it has not helped to actually stem the flood of migrants. What it has done is actually make people more desperate to get into these countries, and they are getting into these countries despite how high the walls are. So you see, human trafficking, yes, it is an issue. There is absolutely no doubt about it. But you do not stop human trafficking by this kind of so-called deterrent action where you send asylum seekers. Now, that doesn't stop the human traffickers from, plying their trade. They will continue to trade. And what you are also going to find is a situation where people are smuggled into these countries because it's not going to stop, and the legitimate asylum seekers amongst them will not have that liberty to come out and seek asylum as granted them, by the Geneva Convention. So really, this scheme is set to compound the situation, not help it.
Yeah, but Collins, the United Kingdom won't be the first country to try this scheme of offshoring migrants. Australia does it. They send will be migrants to faraway countries like Papua New Guinea and Nauru. And when you look at the records, they would say it's been a success. But Australia is different from UK. Now, let's look at the United Kingdom. At least 350 migrants have arrived in the UK after crossing the English Channel in the past 2 days, despite Britain's government new plan to fly out thousands of asylum seekers to Rwanda. Does this cast doubt on the British government's assertion that its Rwanda plan will deter migrants from making that clandestine boat journey across the Channel from France?
It does cast indeed a very, very serious shadow of doubt. And if I may correct the figures you quoted, as a matter of fact, as of this morning, the figure of those that have crossed actually stands, over somewhere around 500 instead of the 350 that had, been quoted earlier. So you see, the situation is actually worse than we imagined. And yes, let me also add that as we speak, the EU is in negotiations with Niger Republic to actually further and enhance similar scheme that the UK has now, taken to a different level. So you see, this is not an isolated case. This is actually, one way of countries that are already very powerful, actually making themselves more powerful by deterring asylums
and violating international law too.
Violating international law, violating the human rights of those who are already, suffering. And come to think of it, Rwanda, of all countries, that has actually been found wanting in terms of how they respect the rights of minorities, the rights of, asylum seekers. Well, you can see, one of the questions that people ask is, why has Rwanda decided to do this when it is on record that they have not been able to contain the asylum seekers in accordance with human rights practices, the ones that are already in their country, and now they are adding to it. It's a very terrible error, and I believe that sooner or later they would find this out.
Now, as you've clearly stated out now that Rwanda also houses other asylum seekers from other countries, why do you think we still have other countries like Burundi and Congo and Libya and Pakistan still have a deal with Rwanda despite these accusations?
Well, simply because they don't care. I think ultimately this is, simply transactional. Rwanda and other, countries that do not give a who about this, scheme actually are looking at more to the side of the financial gains. And ultimately, these are short-term gains. Okay, the UK is paying them about 120, million pounds for this scheme. But this is just, peanuts compared to the ultimate gains that the UK will be making using these African countries as, landing ports. So it is indeed short-sighted on the part of the African countries, in this case, Rwanda. But the UK actually is using this as part of its post-Brexit, arrangement in terms of doing more businesses to show up the loss that they are going to be incurring from, loss of business within the EU.
Now, staying on the country of Rwanda, the British government, in its own report just last year, many people are shocked, just like you. They've expressed amazement at the choice of Rwanda. So last year, Britain itself called for an independent investigation into extrajudicial killings, deaths in custody, and torture in Rwanda. In 2018, and this is on record, Rwandan police shot at least 12 refugees dead as they protested outside the UNHCR office in Karongi district because of reduced food rations. So, to any logical observer, the question will be, why Rwanda? Why do you send refugees to this country that has clearly opened fire on protesting refugees? It's on record. Is this more of a business deal? Is it a quid pro quo? And who sends refugees to a country with dubious right records like that your own country has even admitted and wrote a report on? And Boris Johnson said, Rwanda is one of the safest countries in the world. Does the business side take more precedence than human lives?
It beggars belief, Gbenga, because, the analysis that you have just made, the facts that you have just put on the table are not new to, any international watcher. Britain is very clearly aware of them because they actually highlighted them in, some of these reports. But they are also aware that, in the World Economic Index, the Human Development Index, rather, that Rwanda is about 160 of 189 countries. So what that means is that it is a very vulnerable country. One, that they can use as they want, just like use and trash. That is exactly what they are doing. They are not doing this for the interest of Rwanda. And Rwanda, on his own part, is probably hoping and expecting that they will be seen internationally as a cooperating country when it comes to international affairs, and that they are involved in migration governance.
Also helps their public relations, I guess.
International public relations. But as a matter of fact, that is very much short-sighted, because, to be honest with you, I do not know of any democratic country in this world that has actually supported, at least not openly, this scheme by the UK. And if anything, I believe that this scheme is going to paint Rwanda even darker than it already is.
All right, let's look at the UK now, with lots of condemnations on this particular asylum deal. Now, the Prime Minister said, and he also accepted that there will be legal challenges, which means they are aware of the breach of the 1951 Refugee Convention, which sets out the rights of individuals who are granted asylum. Now, do you think that the UK will dam the consequences and still go ahead? Because a lot of people, human rights organizations, are still kicking against this, and as you rightly said, called it inhumane. Do you think the UK will still dam the consequences?
Oh, yes. They are set to press ahead with this scheme, come what may. There is absolutely no doubt about that. We are just some 2 weeks away from the shipment of the first batch of refugees, of asylum seekers. And so, I believe that the time is probably too short for anything significant to happen in terms of calling a halt to this. They probably are very, very much aware that under scrutiny, and when challenged in international court, that they are going to not just fail, but fail woefully. But then, I believe that their reasoning are twofold. Number one, they would have done what they have done. They would have sent the first batch, which is sending a strong signal. And then secondly, they would have appeased the ultra right-wing, British citizens, and that is the political part of it, because they would have made themselves quite popular with this particular scheme, even if ultimately it is going to fail. They believe that the short-term gain would be, something that makes it worth a while for them.
Now, callers, let's look at it from the migrant side. A lot of people they make the mistake of boxing refugees. These are people that are fleeing war situations. They're professionals, they're doctors, they're people that had their lives disrupted because of war and one reason or the other. So looking at them, I mean, it was a matter of life and death for them to make their precarious journey, to make their way all the way to the shores of England, even at the risk of their lives. So they've left their countries. So don't you see any upside to this deal with Rwanda from their side, perhaps, that, look, at least I would have a roof over my head and I might integrate myself into the society, and they're not shooting guns over my head every day? Because when you compare to Rwanda to where they're coming from, Afghanistan perhaps, it's a much better prospect in life.
Well, what I would say to that, Gbenga, is that if the people felt that Rwanda is heaven, they would have made the move voluntarily to go to Rwanda or come to Nigeria or any other country. But they chose the United Kingdom, and that is for a reason, and that reason has got to be respected. Now, we are also dealing with a very acute case of, inequality in the treatment of humans. As we speak, Ukrainians are fleeing their country en masse. Europe has opened their doors wide for Ukrainians. And don't get me wrong, that's a very, very good thing. That is fantastic. But it should go round. It should go around because there are countries in Africa and other parts of the world where there is ongoing war, forgotten war, I must say. To what extent have they opened their doors for them? No, they haven't done that because Ukraine is a white, race country, and so it is easier to, accept them here and all of that. So, that is simply not fair.
And just to buttress your point, the British Prime Minister, a journalist put it to him, Boris Johnson, that would Ukrainian refugees be sent to Rwanda? He said no.
But I wonder, Gbenga and Collins, do you actually feel Britain has a moral responsibility to bear? I mean, don't you also see it as a fact of the British government defending their own territory and more blame the governments of the African countries who are not able to put their government right? Because why would you want to leave your country to go all the way or even pass through the treacherous journey of the Mediterranean Sea if your African country is actually doing well? So do you see this as a blame on the African governments who are not doing well, or governments who have failed to protect the citizens and actually leave Britain as it's defending its own territory?
A very fantastic point that you have raised there, Rita. And yes, I agree with you that the origin of the issue we are discussing is actually the failure of leadership in Africa. Now, there is enough blame to go around, because part of that failure of leadership is actually being enhanced and being encouraged actively, clandestinely and otherwise, by some of these Western countries. Some of these wars that are tearing Africa apart are actually being ignited from the capital of some of these destination asylum seekers or refugee countries. So it is a whole web in terms of the Western world actually taking responsibilities for the actions that they take that leave Africa high and dry, that actually instigate a crisis in Africa, and then the chicken ultimately comes home to roost.
I mean, case in point, you can look at Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and looking at the foreign policy of Britain. Does that give them a moral responsibility to bear, knowing that they actually were part of these problems in these countries by invading them in the first place?
It does, but they simply don't care. They don't care because ultimately, I'll give you one example to buttress the point that I'm trying to make. In 2020, the UK government under Boris Johnson abolished the Department for International Development. Now, when they did that, they decided to, embed it within the, Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So what that essentially means is that for them, international development is no longer something that they should be doing. It has to be part of diplomacy. Now, for them, it is business. This is transactional. And the only thing they see is a long-term, profit for Britain, and not supporting the development of Africa because, they translate national interest from a very narrow perspective, rather than a perspective that is broad, that says, for instance, that supporting job creation, initiative in developing country is actually part of, the national interest of the Western world, because what that means is that it keeps young people in Africa. And then to come back to Rita's point, definitely, until the African leaders get their acts together, these problems will continue to fester.
On that note, I would like to say a very big thank you to you, Collins Nweke, Global Affairs Analyst, talking to us live from Brussels in Belgium. We do hope to have you back soon, and thanks for your insight and contribution on this program.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're watching The Conversation on News Central Television. We'll go on a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be moving to Nigeria, where politics is heating up as we inch closer to the 2023 elections. The president has come out to define the characteristics of the successor he wants. We'll introduce our guest in a moment after this break. Do stay with us.